say what I just said again.
No, please just continue, Karen.
Okay. Thank you, Mindy. So yes, I'm just going to get into it now. We're going to talk through key themes of feedback that we've received, and I'll mention how we're going to address those. We're going to open it up. So Dr. Chris Gomans has also joined us here, and he's going to focus more specifically on the needs assessment piece and how we're going to address that going forward. So I'm going to lay out some of the broader things. We can have some discussion on that, and then Chris will really go into depth on our path forward for the needs assessment. So we, first and foremost, I think, the executive summary, we realize that is what most folks will be reading of this report. And it was, kind of a rushed effort to get the executive summary developed in the last draft. And that's an area that we realize we need to spend some significant time on to make it more impactful, really focusing on, that message again. It's like crucial funding needs, and then if we can condense some of the some of the alternative funding recommendations into that a little more succinctly, that's where we're going to go with that. Another piece that we received feedback on was understanding in the alternative funding options, really more explicitly calling out how Tabor affects all of those options, and calling out an area where we list debrucing different parts of the severance tax as a specific alternative. And one thing Mindy and I were playing around with on Friday was being able to list different components of severance tax, and then list different options that we've put forward and where those might actually fill those gaps going forward. We have yet to talk about that with the research team, but essentially putting in a table a little clearer linkage of the needs part and the severance taxes, and then the alternative funding options. So I think that could be a good visualization of kind of linking those two sections together. And then we also talked about, this is a dense report. It's got a lot of content, and there's people who are going to read this who have a lot of background, and it's easily understandable. There's others who are going to read this and it's going to be the first time they're seeing this, at all. And so how can we try and get the most important information in the main body of the text? One of the things we talked about was moving. We have this big chunk that describes all the past bills that touch on severance tax. And so we talked about moving that into the appendix, leaving HB 261387, at least a short description in the main body, because that is very relevant to the current report, and it affects kind of our approach. But putting most of that text into an appendix so that we're not kind of bogging things down with all of that background information. Those were some of the key things. And now, before I get into the needs assessment section, does anyone have any other comments they want to share that were kind of bigger picture, or areas besides the needs assessment? Because we're going to talk about that in depth here. But any other feedback that someone wanted to highlight? Okay. Okay.
Aaron,
So yes.
I got to ask my question that I'm a squeaky wheel on of where did where did the task force end up on the big number?
Yeah, so I'm going to describe that now. That's part of the needs assessment, right? The 40
Cool.
billion. Yeah. So, any other thoughts before we start talking about that? Okay. Now that's where we got, I think, the most feedback was in, and we talked about it a lot at our last task force meeting, was, how this $40 billion number was produced with the needs assessment, and then how we want to describe need going forward. So as Nate was talking, we kind of moved. The scope of this work is not only describing need related to severance tax. It's also it's how severance tax meets part of the overall need, right? And so what we've been talking about is we have, per the recommendation of the task force, we received two sets of data to essentially determine some of that funding need, overall funding need. One of the sources was the CWCB projects database, which is largely based off the basin implementation plans. And then the other was the Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Fund, which is part of the local government funding piece. There are other databases out there. Those are the data sets that we were directed to from the task force to use as an assessment of need. So that is where that number came from. The approach that we're going to take, which Chris is going to get into. So overall, I think our goal is to describe accurately, here's a data set. This is what is included in this data set, particularly as it relates to the CWCB projects database, describing, some of the limitations, which I don't think we accurately did in the past draft, in the fact that, some of these are maybe less realistic projects, describing that there could be some overlap between the CWCB projects database and the EMIAF database, and making sure, we're fully describing the caveats of those data, that data that we have, not combining the two numbers of estimated need because there could be potential overlap. So describing one bucket, one data set, another bucket, another data set. Also making sure we're bringing in the gap analysis that was done as part of the 2023 water plan. So using that $50 million number as, that was a gap that was estimated by CWCB, specifically related to water supply projects. So, I think maybe what we didn't accurately do in the past draft is just really caveat the information that we have and adequately describe, this is the data that we have. These are the limitations. This is what it means. Not combining the two data sets and then leading into the alternative funding sources as filling in for severance tax. So I'll leave it there. And Chris, you are going to go into the weeds a little bit more on this. So I'll introduce Dr. Chris Gomans, and I see Dave. Dave has a question.
Yeah, just for clarification, if we're going to use the energy impact database as a source, we need to make sure it's clear that that's really the intersection of supply and demand. It's just who applies and for the amount of money that we have. So it's not really going to capture the full demand side. So it's important that be made clear. And then I had a question. Are we not using the UIP data from CWPHE at this point? Because that's more similar to CWCB in that it's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's aspirational. It's
right.
The full list of projects that they have on their list. So I was just wondering if that's being dropped in its entirety or if that's still going to be a consideration in the report.
Yeah, my understanding is that you know, we didn't get that input until a couple weeks ago, and I don't think we have the ability to analyze the information and synthesize it and get it into the report. I think we can, again, it's all about how we frame the information that we have. And so we can recognize that there's this other, um, you know, component out there that is significant to funding, is that the drinking water, um, primarily drinking water projects. And so while we aren't going to include necessarily like an analysis of the projects that exist in that bucket, we can certainly recognize that that's another funding area. And similarly, I know we've heard from Robert Sakata at different times, that so task force, like the task force, we've heard lots of great feedback. I think there's some feedback that's saying, our estimate is too high. Some feedback that's saying that's too low. And I was going to say, Robert Sakata has mentioned, like, that's not really even including a lot of the agricultural water infrastructure projects that are needed. And so, I think we need to describe these numbers as for what they are, describe what they may be missing, and describe, how that's then related to severance tax. So that's our plan. And Chris, I'm going to allow you to go into a little more detail here. Yeah, Nate.
You just gonna
I just wanted to follow up just very briefly on what Karen was saying. I think, and part of this discussion is just how fluid and difficult to pin down like a total need number is. And so it's really my hope, I think, as Karen was describing, that we can use the report to, like, yes, communicate um, based on the data we have what those needs are, but even more important, I think, is like describing the processes by which like a community would go about like bringing together different funding sources and like making decisions on funding, and then what is the appropriate state role in that picture. And so I as we've gone through this, I think it's become apparent to me that, a total overall number, I think, is less important than conveying the complexity and sort of fluidity of these funding processes. So that's sort of how I'm looking at the needs assessment here, and especially in light of some of the feedback sort of in both directions on what that overall number looked like. Yeah, Chris, please jump in, but I just wanted to sort of tag on to Karen's comment there.
I would say yes, and I don't want to misconstrue those comments as thinking I'm trying to get to an exact number that we can all pin our hats on. I think what we need to do is show the scale of the need as compared to the resources available, and make sure it's clear in the executive summary that the scale vastly exceeds the resources available. Because we want legislators to look at that and go, oh my God, we have a problem. I mean, if we don't, they're not going to pay attention to the report.
so Dave, I agree with you 100%. And that's one path that I think we should take. There are other paths that we can discuss, but I think the message that I think meets the needs of the report and the statement of work is to highlight that federal funding has decreased dramatically over the past 30 or 40 years. And if you think about the different sources that local water agencies and individual parties can utilize, federal funding has diminished dramatically. Then there's state funding, and everything that isn't paid for then falls on the individual ratepayer or on the individual producer, the individual ditch company, or the project doesn't get done, as I think Nate pointed out, or somebody pointed out one of their statements or comments. So I think, to your point, the scale suggests that it's far greater than what's available in terms of state resources. And any dollar that isn't provided ends up following on the individual ratepayer or the individual water user. So I would like to suggest that as the framework for how we kind of recraft this, as opposed to putting a number in the executive summary or anywhere that pretends that we can add these up together and we know that's the exact number. All these different data sources that we have, they're not mutually exclusive. They miss out on certain funding needs. So I don't think we can get to a single number. What we can do is say the number's way bigger than what you realize. What do we think about that approach?
I agree.
Others
So it's
have thoughts?
essentially the philosophy would be is that we're pointing to all the different estimates out there, talking about uh, what they encompass, what they don't encompass, um, putting in plenty of caveats that say that we can't just directly add these, and even if we did, there are certain water projects out there that probably, aren't included in those, so the number's even, larger than what we might think, and leaving it there.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that approach, and that's consistent with our thinking as well.
Does anyone take issue or have another approach that they want to suggest?
No, I think that's the best shot we have. So yeah.
I agree. I don't think it matters. We just know it's a lot bigger than what we can collect. And as long as we make that point, I think that's Dave's point as well, is highlight the point. We need the funds, and our need outweighs the funds that we have by a long ways.
Now, I will add, I do think that there's and you can kind of help with this. I think it helps to highlight what's not included in those. Robert, your point about agricultural projects, I think that's another important thing. I think in the current version, figure 6 and figure 7, I think do have value. If we can add caveats to where that is just a portion of the data and doesn't reflect everything. And here's why I think those add value. I think they add value because they show the geographic scope. This is not just Denver. It's many rural areas throughout Colorado that have these needs. And then if you look at even a subset of the projects that are reflected in figure 7, and so that's not the entire, number. When you look at those on a per capita basis, look at those needs, and that's just a fraction. I mean, in some counties, we're looking at 150,000 per person in terms of needs, and many of those are in rural areas. So I think that those, even though those numbers, and we want to make sure we add the caveat that they do not represent the suite of projects. So we're not taking the total need and dividing it by the number of people. We're taking a subset of the need and dividing it by the number of people, just to highlight how substantial that need is, especially in many of the rural areas. So I think there's value in including those, but if you guys think otherwise, we're definitely open to listening.
Does everyone know what figures we're talking about? It's the two maps.
I wonder if Karen or Mindy, you might be able to share your screen just so that everyone can see exactly what Chris is
Yeah.
referencing.
Mindy, would you be able to do that?
I mean, I like sort of the message those two figures are trying to convey. And I think we could argue all day whether it's the right numbers or the wrong numbers or the right counties, but I think they provide a good, quick message. And I think that's important.
All right. Mindy, are you there? Do you want me to try and share? I didn't hear anything. I'll try
Yeah,
and
no,
share.
I'm like
Okay.
scrolling through the multiple.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure we don't just show all the comments too.
I'll say too, I agree with Steve. I think, you know, those show a quick picture and convey, you know, the geographic scope of the need, and I think make an important point in sort of referring to the population density of different areas with great need. So I think they're important.
And we can just make sure and add some of the caveats that I think, you know, we've discussed here. You know, the nice thing about the per capita figures is they kind of show areas of the state where the number may not be as large as what we see along the Front Range, but on a per person basis, it's quite substantial in kind of some of those rural areas.
Just from a presentation standpoint, I don't know about accessibility, but I changed the colors because green seems like, that's a positive thing. I would
Fair
like to
enough.
see red be the highly, the high cost areas.
Good point.
I think a key point here too is this doesn't diminish the need in like more highly populated areas. I think the fact that an area like Denver still shows some shade of green despite the large population shows that there's great need there as well.
Yeah, and I think so that's why I'd like both of them. So if we go up to well, if you look at figure 6, it's not on the per capita basis, and it kind of shows kind of those bigger needs in the more densely populated areas. To your point, and I think then also pointing out that look, this is a fraction of the needs. It doesn't include everything, and we're just including these for the purpose of showing the geographic scope and and some of the impacts on not only the urban areas, but it's also the rural areas that there's tremendous need for these funds.
Real quick, this is showing $4 billion of need in Weld County, for instance. Do we have a quick answer to what's needed in Weld County at 4 billion?
I don't have that in front of me, but we will go back and double check where that is coming from.
I think this is a little bit of where this makes me nervous. And certainly the needs are big. The importance of this is crucial, but I worry that we lose a little bit of the solvability of this, if that's even a word. Every year we say no to billion-dollar transportation, ballot measures and education ballot measures, and people just throw their hands in the air saying, "Wow, those are really important, but they're really big numbers, and we can't chip away at that." Um, Severance tax at 160 million a year isn't enough, but it's been, getting things done. I just really want to make sure that we're weighing on that gap analysis of like things that truly can't get funded if we don't have the money and not scaring people away from this issue.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I wonder if they need to be scared. And maybe your argument would be this isn't the place. You know, I I know it's anecdotal, but there are a number of water utilities where their rates, because they've put off infrastructure or supply acquisition or any of those things, have gone up 50, 100%, where customers have $150 a month bills, $200 a month bills. And I think this is me taking off, this is me stepping outside the report, but based on my conversations with people, that's where we're headed if we don't. I mean, because ultimately this falls on the customer. So I agree that there's that balance and of not wanting to say this is an impossible problem to solve, but there's also kind of weighing that against this is a huge problem that's on the horizon, and we need to take it seriously. So I'd be,
Yeah, I would just push back and say
yeah,
that that's maybe not the issue for this task force.
yeah,
Right? Those are absolutely important issues, at utility levels, at, all of that. I think where we've been looking though is the role of the state. And unless we're proposing that, the state is now going to, pardon my loose language, subsidize a bunch of, deferred maintenance or water rates or, whatever because of, other issues.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm just, so if I look at the legislation and the statement of work, I see kind of define local and regional water funding needs. I see it as described as very broad, and how I was when I was thinking about kind of how we kind of reframe this a little bit, I was thinking that's because the reality is it's true that there's this tremendous burden on local agencies. And so any dollar that the state doesn't provide just adds to that burden where there's already intense competition. So maybe it's a matter of saying that a little more clearly in in and highlighting that we're not suggesting that the state is responsible for all of those costs, but rather that there's an extremely competitive uh, need landscape, and that any dollar that we take away makes things more difficult. Is that I mean, the alternative is we can take out figure 6 and figure 7 if we don't like those numbers being so large.
Yeah, I do think Brian's point sort of gets to this broader question, and at least in my mind, the statement, which I think is in the report somewhere, but maybe we need to, elevate its, position. But the statement that like the state and severance tax in particular have never met the entire need and never will meet the entire need, but are just one piece of this complex puzzle, I think is like is an important element here. Um, and I don't know, Brian, if that at least partially addresses some of the, I think, valid concern you've shared. And if there's some way to frame it in a way that alleviates that concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important context for all this. I just struggle with it being the main point. And perhaps I'm just jumping, too many levels here, but ultimately, legislature has to go do something with this. And pretty much all of the options that we have are going to voters and framing this with a Tabor tax question. Shall taxes be raised by X amount for blank? And that number isn't 40 billion. It's not a billion, it's something different. And that's I think the most useful number that we can come to, and we may not be able to. Or come up with anything that's sufficient.
Yeah, I think adding in the language that suggests that we're not saying that the state should be responsible for this. They haven't. I think that language that you just used, Nate and Brian, I think making sure that that's clear in there, I think is something we can do a much better job of. This is where we're kind of on both ends. Some people are saying the number needs to be huge, and then others are saying it can't be too huge. And so that's where we're trying to kind of land the plane, so to speak.
And Eric, I see you've got your hand up. Please jump in.
Thanks, Nate. Well, two things really. One, just and with respect to Weld County, I think they've got like something on the order of like 35 or 36 municipalities within Weld County, and it is the fastest growing county in the state. So, I mean, I think that's partly why it's rising to the top, is you've got a lot of small systems out there. And then moreover, the severance tax was created to address the needs in the local. So just to push back a little, I think it is the state's responsibility. We do partner with these communities. We're trying to help them out, especially the smaller ones who, like you said, they cannot raise their rates enough. We had a project in the town of Crook this last time around in our energy impact round recently. This is a town of like 100 or 120 people with a price tag of like $5 million for this new water, like a wastewater system. There is no way. I mean, they just cannot borrow enough to ever, or raise their rates enough to ever address some of this. And this is happening all across the state. So I'm definitely in the camp of the number is ginormous. And while I share your concern that some people are just going to throw their hands up and go, well, it's a drop in the bucket. We can't do anything. We've got to do something. And that something is to stop the diversion of severance tax. And I know Nate and Carly and Dave and I on Friday just got hammered with yet another ad valorem tax credit, $60 million credit being issued that's going to wipe out our severance tax revenues for the next few months. I mean, the hits just keep coming in this program. I mean, and so like the timing of this report is critically important. And so anyway, that's just want to make those points. I think the severance tax was created in part to help local communities, at least on the DOLA side. That's why the severance tax is collected, is to address impacts in communities and to help them as they struggle to kind of keep up and either diversify from from a fossil fuel based economy, or just to continue, but knowing that there's impacts all across the state. Thanks.
I was just going to add, I think with relation to those two figures and the numbers in them, again, just making sure we're clear about the methodology used to come up with those numbers. I believe that was over a 20-year period. So, in our description of the figures, just making sure we have all those caveats included. Mindy, are you okay? You're sharing the figures. And I apologize. I was looking at a document and I misspoke about the data, the two databases that we were using. It was the Colorado Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund database in addition to the CWCB project database. So apologies for the confusion if I misspoke previously. Okay, to summarize, it sounds like we can live with going forward on describing the overall need, not necessarily listing one big number, but describing the need is greater than the funding that is available. Funding landscape is complex. Severance tax is one piece of that puzzle. Describing the gap analysis that CWCB did, and including the two figures, still ensuring that we have lots of caveats around how we're describing those numbers, and more clarity in the methodology used to get to those numbers. Before you go, Dave, can I just, does that sound like the approach that we're agreeing upon generally? I see some nodding of heads. Dave, did you have a question or comment on that?
Yeah, just I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the challenges and the almost inappropriateness of the way that we're relying on severance tax for this. We're going to be providing so much less in FY27 than we've ever provided. It's not a stable source. It's not a reliable source. It's a source that continues to get swept. And if that's not a major sub-theme of the executive summary, then that point might get lost on the legislators reading the report.
Thank you. Yeah, that's important to highlight. One other point I'll just call to attention that we received feedback on was, severance tax doesn't just support water projects, it also supports the operational fund, and, kind of the significance of what that operational fund does. And now that's more complicated, but making sure we tell that story as well, and the relation to the severance tax funding piece. So, okay, any other comments on the needs assessment? I have a few more things I would like to talk through. Okay, thanks, Chris, for helping walk us through. Nate, did you have a
Maybe just
comment?
before we move on, I just appreciate everyone's input on what is like a really tricky question around how we frame this for its intended effect and with accurateness. So I appreciate everyone engaging in this discussion and helping guide CSU to pin this down in the best way we can. So thank you.
Right. Yes, thanks, everyone. So a few more things about next steps. One of the other, I guess, points of feedback that we were thinking about. So we will be working with a graphic designer on the final products. So we'll have the full report and an executive summary that will be pretty, and hopefully, call out key figures and things like that we are trying to communicate. In a preliminary discussion with the graphic designer, he thought it could be interesting to kind of humanize the report. And so what does that look like? With regards to specific case studies, so when we're talking about projects that have been funded in the past with severance taxes, having a really beautiful image of said project and describing the way in which funding was used and the different funding sources came together to do said thing. That was one of the things he suggested. Another thing was bringing quotes into the report. And this is something we wanted to get your feedback on. Basically, quotes from the task force, and you can volunteer yourself or not, or we can not do this at all. But basically, quotes from the task force to say, what is the role of severance taxes? Why is this important? Because, you all have some stake in this, right? And so particularly, local government, ag, county representatives and things like what is the role of severance taxes? Why is this funding source important? And kind of calling out more of the human story to that. And so using quotes is a way to do that. So I wanted to get feedback on that thought. One of the ideas was to, look at different meetings that we've had, like the task force meetings, to like try and find quotes. I don't think that's realistic, nor do you probably want us to go back and find, a comment that you made like 3 meetings ago. So what would probably be best, if this is of interest, is for you all to send a potential quote to include, and we can put it in there. We would attribute obviously your name. That's kind of the point, is to, say, hey, we've got this really diverse group of folks that are all saying severance taxes are important for this reason, and or this funding source is important, and this is why it's problematic, for example. So first off, is that of interest to folks? It doesn't have to be everyone. Just want to throw that out there as an idea. See, Brian is kind of saying yes.
So I guess my first gut reaction, I mean, I like the idea of example projects. I think that's always good. I'm on the fence about using personal quotes. Does that take away from the needs of the thing and make this too friendly of a report? I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm on the fence about that piece of it, but interested in other people's thoughts.
Other people's thoughts.
We're a quiet bunch this morning, sorry, Karen. I'm okay with both myself. So not that I would contribute anything profound, but I'm okay with both.
I like the idea. I think adding people in or projects in speaks to the diversity of the funding. So I think it's a great idea.
Agree.
Okay, I'm hearing agrees. And again, this doesn't have to be everyone on the task force. I guess if there's a reason why this is not a good idea and you want to follow up later, we can certainly do that as well. Nate, were you going to say something?
I was just I didn't I think Steve raised a good point. I mean, I agree it's a good idea, and I'm glad folks are willing to provide some. Steve, do you think there's a way to maybe focus potential quotes to be like highlighted in the report in a way that like focuses readers in on like the key things we're trying to convey, and isn't just like feelings and thoughts, but really like directing them to sort of our key takeaways?
Yeah, and again, I'm not opposed to the quotes. I guess my first reaction is to focus on those needs and those projects. And maybe if the quotes are very focused on a project, that makes sense, but I don't want to try and take away from the actual on the ground needs. And so, like I said, I'm kind of on the fence about quotes. I'm certainly not opposed to it greatly. So I guess it's how it ends up structured.
Karen, maybe a helpful thing is for y'all to ghost write a number of quotes that you would want, and then people can assign themselves to them. I think part of the challenge, or at least prompts, right? Like part of the challenge is I wouldn't even know what to quote myself, or that would be helpful and that you could insert. So
Both Brian and Jim have said they don't have any good quotes. I think you're both selling yourself short. I think you've got a lot of insight here. To
well,
be
yeah,
clear, Brian, I think it's a good
I
idea.
could talk all day. It just wouldn't
Yeah,
be on topic.
I know. I'm giving you a
Sure,
hard time.
yeah.
I think it's a good idea to maybe prompt some
Yep.
questions on that. I was just Like it's funny. You
Absolutely.
and Jim both have such great thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think just getting a sense, it sounds like the group is generally in favor of this. Eric has a lot of quotes that he wants to provide. This kind of just shopping the idea with you all, making sure it's something you wanted to do. I don't think we would just open it up to like, just whatever quote on like your feelings and stuff. We will give you prompts and help to focus in on kind of what that story is and how we're telling it. So we have a meeting with the project team tomorrow. We will get some prompts developed and send those out to you all. If that sounds like a good approach. Okay. Great. The other thing, is that the only other thing? Um, so we are planning to hopefully oh, Nate, you have a hand
I
raised.
wasn't sure if we had anything else to discuss, not on the needs assessment, but on sort of the future funding options. I don't know if we sort of exhausted that part of the conversation.
Yeah, I just mentioned, we're including, I think the feedback that we got is to include more detail in those descriptions overall. And then also to, thanks, Elise, also to call out debrucing as a specific option, which was not previously done in the draft. Are there other feedback on that section that folks wanted to discuss?
Karen, the only thing that hit me, and this is maybe way off. So when I was looking at figure 5, which is all the other states, how much money they bring in, and then at our executive summary, it just seemed like Colorado was doing okay. While it was volatile, Colorado was doing okay, but we're at the bottom. And I'm just wondering why we're always at the bottom. It's, and you have other states that are like Wyoming has the permanent trust fund kind of thing. But sometimes I wonder if the legislature realizes that when they institute all these policies that really kind of hamper oil and gas and other extraction activities, if they realize that's really what's hitting I mean, up in our area, the oil and gas people have gone, they're coming back a little bit now, but they went to other areas because of our policies. And I'm just wondering if they realize that when you do these policies, you're going to drive production in other places. And I don't know if we captured that in the executive summary. I mean, we said that we were evolving with our energy or whatever, but to me it's more than evolving. We're making a conscious effort to change the way we think about, that kind of production, and it affects our severance tax. And so one thing that we can do if people have the appetite for it is roll some of those things back to boost the production of those kind of extraction efforts. So I know, we were, at first I thought we were just looking for alternatives to severance tax, but it actually is called the future of severance tax. And we can change that future some by doing some rolling back of certain policies. And I don't know what all those would be, but just to bring it to light that, hey, there are some things that you could do because we've been so hard on some of these extraction activities that you can change the path and once again bolster some of our severance tax along with a permanent fund, maybe like Wyoming does. But those are just my thoughts, and whether it's worth putting something in the executive summary that just points that out. I'd like to hear what other people think.
I guess Jim, I agree with you completely on that, but with one caveat that if you do that, you've got to make sure that revenue that comes up doesn't just get diverted by the legislature. So
Yeah.
to me, that would be it's a two-part solution there.
Yeah, I agree. The permanent part, trust fund part would be worked nicely, I think.
Yeah.
Dave?
Yeah, I'm not really clear from this graph, how much of the differences in these lines is from differences in production versus differences in tax rates and how we collect severance. I'm wondering if there's a way to kind of
Yeah,
tease that out.
Yeah, so
that
on
was.
the last task force meeting, we talked about feedback, which I think Jim missed that one, about feedback for incorporating production to this graph. So I think me pulling up this graph kind of took away from Jim's overarching comment. But yeah, we did get feedback from other folks in written comments and in the May 18th meeting about kind of making this graph a little more representative of the context in Colorado. But I think it's detracting from Jim's overarching point too about the dynamics in the state. Sorry, Karen. Did you want to?
Chris
So I
has
was
a
just
comment.
that was a comment, and I actually meant to ask about that, to the suggestion that we normalize this to production levels. And so that's an option to kind of address what you were just mentioning. If we do normalize it to production levels, it loses it disconnects the figure from the reality that these needs are so large, right? So the water funding needs aren't normalized to the production levels. So maybe what we could explore is having a 2-panel graphic, maybe one that's normalized, so it addresses some of that, and one that's not. That's a we can maybe explore trying to do that. I'll talk to the research team. I didn't create this graph, but that's something we could think about if that sounds appealing.
And I guess my comment wasn't necessarily about the graph. It's just as Mindy said, the policy ideas. Because I just look at North Dakota, how they were kind of going along with us. And I know extraction in North Dakota went up about the same time it did in Logan County. But you can see that we didn't take off like North Dakota did. So it's just a point about some of our policy.
So, Jim, I think I'm trying to think where in the report, sort of a note on, fiscal policy isn't necessarily the only thing that affects revenue, but, and I'm wondering, I'm not sure if you provided written comments, but I think if we could, I'm curious where you think that might fit best in the report. And I'm thinking maybe like the background section on like how severance tax revenue is currently collected and sort of what impacts the amounts and sort of volatility. And I think flagging that it's not just fiscal policy and like tax deductions, credits, and exemptions, but also sort of broader state policy that impacts industry behavior, I think is so. I I I think it's a good suggestion, and I'm trying to think where a note like that may fit best.
Yeah, and I was just
And
going to say,
not
I
putting
think
you on the spot right now, Jim, to find a spot, but
I was just going to say to Chris's point, I think that if you have 2 panels, one panel is telling the story that Colorado is not producing that much, and then the other story is telling how, what is the percentage of that production that is going to severance tax.
yeah, I think if that graphic can be created, I think it would be helpful to have both of them side by side.
And maybe the reason why it hit me, I was just at a CCI meeting, Colorado County's summer conference, and we were looking at the cost of housing. And the cost of housing has gone up by $93,000 just to some of the changes that we've demanded from the legislature on, certain rules and regulations that you have to meet. And so it's our decision to do these kind of things is raising the cost of a lot of different things. And when you make these decisions, and if this is the way we want to go, that's fine. But I just wanted people to be aware that as a legislature, as a government, when we make these decisions, it does affect everything else, whether it's collection of severance taxes or whether it's inputs to building houses. So it's all wrapped up in some policy. It's not all policy, but it's some. So that's all I was trying to.
Yeah, Jim, I like the way you phrase that. It's not a values judgment on whether it's right or wrong, but making sure people understand that those policy choices can affect this element. So thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments on the report in general, or the alternative funding options section specifically? Okay, so our goal with these next set of revisions, unfortunately, Rebecca Hill, who is our lead research PI, she is on vacation right now. How dare she? But she's coming back, I think, later today, and so we're hoping to turn around at least the needs assessment portion and the executive summary. Turn that around by June 10th so we can send, that's Wednesday. That is a very short amount of time. But so we can send it to you all and you have a chance to at least look at those pieces, which I think are going to have receive the bulk of the revisions. Look at those. We'll give you a week to provide additional feedback until June 17th. And then we're going to be getting you a final draft, hopefully, quickly, shortly after that. And our goal is to basically do any more kind of back and forth until, what did we say, Mindy? I don't have the timeline pulled up. We cannot make any additional changes after July 1st to the text itself. That is when the graphic designer will be, finalizing the layout and everything. And so we need to have everything kind of built in and ready to go by July 1. Also, with the June 25th presentation date, we're not going to be handing out reports at that meeting, but we will, we'll be presenting figures and information from the report. And so keeping that date in mind as well, we're trying to have our ducks in a row before then. And I see Mindy sending some dates there. Yes, minor edits possible between June 17th and July 1st. So we are in the final stretch here. And again, really appreciate your time and effort on this. I think every little bit of feedback that you're providing makes us a better product and a more impactful product. So we appreciate your help despite, vacations and all of the things that are going on right now. So please continue to do so until that July 1 date, if you can. Mindy, am I missing anything for the timeline or next steps?
No, I think you covered it all.
Okay. Chris, any final thoughts? Okay. Eric.
Hey, thanks. Did you say you're presenting? Is that before like the interim committee, or what presentation's happening on the 25th? I don't have that on my calendar. I just wanted to make a note.
Yeah, you might. I don't know if you missed. Nate was describing earlier on the call. The interim committee, because they cannot meet in the new fiscal year, they're meeting June 25th and will be presenting the results of this study. at that point.
And what time is that, Nate?
I'm just working to find the actual calendar
Okay.
on the General Assembly website. I
It looks like it
believe,
starts at 9
9
a.m.
o'clock. Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
that sounds right. And I'm just looking to share the link in the chat here with everybody so
Awesome.
that folks are all
Thank
tracking.
you. I apologize. I was a little late getting
No,
on this morning. I
no worries.
missed that announcement. So thanks.
And just to be clear, there's a lot else on their agenda. This is one of the presentations.
Okay.
But I think, as I just described earlier, yeah, because the committees can't meet in the coming fiscal year, they're holding this meeting as close to the end of this one as they can, and have asked for us to present this, or for CSU to present this a little earlier than planned. So
Great. We'll plan to be there as well. So thank you. Even just be moral support and a giant foam finger in the back row cheering you guys on. Body paint optional. Thanks, guys.
great.
Thank you.
Thanks for linking that in the chat, Robert. I'm going to drop it again just so that I'm sure that everybody, including our attendees, can see it. And I'll just echo Karen's thanks for all the engagement throughout this process. Folks have made a lot of time for these meetings and for conversations with the CSU team, for reading drafts and providing feedback. So I really want to echo Karen's thanks for all of you for engaging in this and staying engaged just a little bit longer. And we'll all, I'm sure, engage in different ways in the future on how to make some of what's in this report a reality in the future. So we all obviously care a lot about the outcome here. So thank you so much. I know we've got time set aside now for public comment. I don't know if there's anybody that is attending here that would like to offer public comment. If you do, please raise your hand and I can elevate you to a panelist to speak. I will give maybe 30 seconds for folks to do that. Otherwise, I think unless there are any other questions from the task force or final sort of comments, I think we'll wrap up a little early here. I'm not seeing any of our attendees raising their hands for public comment. So any final thoughts from the task force or Karen, CSU team? Any final thoughts?
Nate, I'd just like to thank Karen and her team. I learned a lot from the report, so thanks for putting that all together. It was a nice, concise way to look at former or past legislation and the recommendations the other activities have taken, and then the compiling of all the information. So good job.
Agreed.
Agree,
Yes.
Karen.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, huge thanks to the research team and to all of you again. It's definitely been a wonderful learning process, I know, for me, and I appreciate you all coming along on this journey. So, and thanks to Nate as well.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone. This is obviously a severance tax and associated state programs can be a dry and arcane subject. So I appreciate everyone sticking with us and I think hopefully putting together something that policymakers can really pick up and use in the future to try to address some of these problems. So yeah, thanks for sticking with us.
As a question, have you shared it with Senator Roberts or any of the other bill sponsors yet?
So we wanted to have this discussion first, but we will be sharing it with the bill sponsors upon, I think Karen was saying maybe a little bit later this week, we've got sort of a more close to final version. And yes, it will be shared.
Good. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks again, everyone. We'll see everyone soon.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.